Welcome to the Simply Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sadie Jane, and we have a very special guest today. Heather, I don't even know if I know your last name.
Well, my first last name is Wing,
Okay, Heather Wing, of
but
course
my
it is.
married name is Wilkinson.
Oh, that's right. I know that.
Yeah,
I know
I
that.
called in more of my English Scottish
Yeah.
ancestry with my marriage.
Guys, I'm so excited to have Heather. Well, here's the truth. If you ask to come stay with me, I'm going to probably ask you to be on the podcast. Because most likely, if you are a close friend of mine, you have an incredible story, and I think you're incredible, and I have to share it. So, why, Heather? Why are you here? And who is even Heather? I have to start by just introducing how we met. And we met almost exactly a year ago in the Scottish Hills on a Scottish pilgrimage. And Heather's from Canada, which we are going to get into because literally that's why you're here, is specifically your story. And actually, before we even go any further, I have to address the elephant in the room, which is that I have bright red hair, which actually is connected completely to Scotland. When I was in Scotland, well, we have heritage over in Europe, obviously. But my deep heritage is in Scotland. And this is going to be a tangent, but it's important to say. I went to Scotland. I've been wanting to go to a pilgrimage. I went years ago with my family and we saw the Donaghadore Castle, which is where my ancestors are from. The Keith line, we have a crest, we have all the things. Called a tartan, right?
Mhm.
All the things. But it didn't mean as much to me then as it did now. I came with Jeff. We went with Ryan McKenna, who is an incredible Scottish shaman who guides these exceptional tours all throughout the Highlands. So we're not just like going to Edinburgh. We're literally like driving hours, taking hours on ferries, hiking multiple miles. Like the pilgrimage was 2 weeks and it changed my life. It was super intense. And I'm going to get into a funny part about Heather and I because we ended up being roommates for a part of it. Little did I know I was going to get roommated like with other women other than just Jeff. I actually got segregated away from Jeff, and the boys had to sleep together, and the girls had to sleep together.
It was like old fashioned times.
We literally slept in old fashioned. What were they even called? Huts?
I called it a hobbit house.
It literally.
That's what I like to say where we
thatched
met.
roofs.
Yeah.
Like rock walls, spiders everywhere.
Edge of the earth.
Literal edge of the earth, a very, very, very far north corner of Scotland. We saw the Canalish Stones. It was life-changing, but it was quite an experience. I somehow got stuck in the room with all the snoring ladies. I don't know how that happened.
I'm a recovering snorer.
Yeah. Well, it was all good company, but I was like, what is going on? I remember at one point I sat at the edge of the bed while everyone was sleeping, and I was like, if these are all a reflection of me, how did I get here? At one point, Gina, oh my gosh, Gina's now in Sacred Rebel. She's amazing. She wore her like bug net to bed because she was afraid of the spiders. It was just comedy and hard and also really, really empowering and beautiful. It was so powerful for me. One of my biggest intentions to go to Scotland was to heal a lot of the ancestral line of my ancestors leaving for a quote unquote better life in America. And a lot of my ancestry is tied to religious ancestry. And so for me to go even further back, to put my feet, not just in Edinburgh, but like on the soil that my ancestors were indigenous to. I genuinely don't know what it's like to live in a place where your DNA is indigenous to. And so to go back and do that, it was extremely transformative for all of us on that trip. Lots of shadows that came up, lots of healing, lots of reflections,
sisterhood, brotherhood,
so much family. And getting back to the red hair situation, I have always resisted the red hair. And then I went to Scotland. I don't know if I was like pinged with getting red hair when I was at Scotland, but I know it's in my ancestry. Like I have fairer skin. My face is actually more red. Like I have red tones to my skin, and I always pull brassy when I dye my hair. Anyway, this is getting way too deep, but of course I make it deep, everything I do. But finally I said yes to dyeing my hair, and it's bright red. If you're not watching this on YouTube, you'll have to go check out my Instagram to see my bright red hair. And I did it on the eclipse, literally while the eclipse was eclipsing. I was putting dye in my hair. And then it's so funny because that night Heather showed up at my house. Of course, she was flying to my house on the eclipse. And I've never been a redhead before. And now all of a sudden I'm like, it's my identity. Like, was I ever supposed to be anything other than red? I don't know.
I saw you immediately as the character from Brave.
Oh my gosh.
Or the
Yes.
essence, right?
Totally.
And I just was telling Sadie that now I think it would be cool to look into more of the Celtic goddesses and the female druids.
I've been feeling called to, especially after Scotland, learn Gaelic medicine songs. And I just, a lot of my medicine songs are beautiful. Lakota, Quechua, they've been passed down from my elders. Peruvian, like just so many beautiful, but there's definitely, and of course my songs that I've created myself, but to learn my indigenous language, especially Gaelic, which is being, I mean, it's leaving the earth. There's not a lot of people that know it. So I'm redhead. I have my Scottish sister here. Oh, and literally last night she gave me this gift, which was so beautiful and so sweet. It was from a local Toronto artist, right? And it's this girl kneeling down and like looking at a buck, and she has red long hair. And it's just so funny, the coincidences. Of course, there's no coincidences.
And I had bought it like a month ago.
Yeah. Amazing. Of course. Okay, so on this journey, so I have red hair. So that we've crossed that. We've taken care of that. We mentioned that. Now that that's out of the way, let me talk about Heather and how I met her. We're on this journey. There are 20 of us, which initially was supposed to be 12. And I was so annoyed initially because I was like, this is 2 weeks out of my life. There's a lot of people here. And then the annoyance then didn't necessarily grow. It was just that we were traveling so many different places, packing up, traveling, and all these different places we were staying. And there's no other choice but to get super familiar with each other. So immediately Heather and I kind of connected, but we were just kind of like, I mean, you're hiking, you're in these spiritual experiences. It's impossible not to connect really with everybody. But I think it was one point, I'm trying to remember when it first happened, when I first started hearing your story. I mean, I know it was, we were driving somewhere and
the really long van ride.
Across the Highlands of Scotland. And
on the way to the castle.
Yes. Roslyn Chapel?
Yeah.
Was it?
No, the one on the other side, closer to the Isle of Skye.
Oh, okay.
Where we stopped for lunch that day.
Oh, okay. No, it's all a blur. It's all a blur. But you'll get to know Heather through this podcast, and she's got a very beautiful way of storytelling, and it's actually in her human design. She has a Fructigenius channel. She's a splenic projector. And her throat's defined. So, and it was just, and you can tell, you'll be able to tell when I actually let her talk and I shut up, but she would not, speaking of shutting up, shut up about her experience in Canada during COVID. And Scotland was the very first time you had left Canada, right?
I had been in Cuba, which is an extension of Canada.
Okay.
But you're mostly there with other Canadians.
Yeah. So you were allowed to go there.
And I think there's something so much more profound when you've now put your feet in the earth of your ancestors, where battles have been fought. And the truth of who we are as ancestors and Indigenous people of Scotland has been a lie. And you've just currently lived a lie, or something that has been played out as a lie on the world stage. So it really, and also to see the look on everybody's face that they were open to hearing the storytelling, because when you're a storyteller and you haven't even called that in, because that's considered a title that an Indigenous person in Canada would identify with, and I wouldn't have the privilege to call myself that. But I had been working on that for about a year. So watching all of your faces, especially Jeff's, was my favorite.
Yeah, he was shook.
His eyes just kept getting brighter in the comparison of our life adventures together, of waking up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I felt that, like, there was so much. I guess it was a couple days into our journey when you started feeling comfortable enough to continue to share more and more. And I guess you did share a little bit on the beginning day when we were all in a circle and talking about it. But when you started sharing your story, you shared it with such devotion. It was as if you had just been in battle, which you very much felt like you had been in battle. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the stories you were sharing, I had never even heard. Like, they weren't televised. Things weren't. I heard that it was that the lockdowns were pretty intense in Australia and in Canada, but no one, you didn't know. I didn't know.
What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Right.
And everyone's just trying to kind of navigate it, especially now that we're a little bit out of, for the most part, we have maybe a little bit more facts, and there's maybe some people that are like, oh, hindsight. But it was so intense back then. It was so intense that it was like everybody was silenced. Everyone, at least it felt like most of the people were afraid to share what they believed. And I think this goes without saying, I believe in sovereign autonomy, just straight up bottom line. And so while I share Heather's story and she shares pieces of them that will maybe activate you, I want to mention and remind everybody that this is her personal story. And I want to give her a platform as the Simply Wild podcast to share that story, because being wild, coming back to the wild within you, is for very real for Heather, for standing up for her rights and standing up for what she believed in. And really, that's kind of what started your spiritual awakening, right? COVID.
Sovereign autonomy.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us about that. I'll start shutting up. So as I'm shutting up, and she could not stop shutting up about this particular powerful story. I heard about it a lot in Scotland, and it was so funny because she was like, Sadie, I have to come and visit your family. I have to just come like sit with you at the dinner table and like see how you live your life. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And now she's here.
Yeah.
And I just felt so called to take a minute out of your visit. So thank you so much for sharing this. I know it's really brave. I know it's pretty controversial, but I just want to hear, I think what you just experienced a few years ago is really, it made my jaw drop. And I want others to be able to hear the stories that aren't being told.
Okay.
So let's go.
We're going to start with my birth.
Okay. Do it. Let's go.
So I was born in Toronto at a public hospital. Our healthcare is covered there. And my parents emigrated from the UK. So I'm first generation Canadian. I have no family in Canada, just my parents, my sister. So I was born in 1984. And at that time, the blood system in Canada was tainted, also in the US and in the UK. And this is something that we did not talk about over the last 4 years, that the government knew that the blood system in our countries was tainted.
I don't know what that means.
Right. So literally when you were having a blood transfusion, you were put at risk of getting HIV or hepatitis.
So it's not even that like the A was accidentally the B. It wasn't that. It was like
fully in the blood system.
Interesting. Okay.
And so people that were hemophiliacs were at the highest risk, obviously, of getting it because you're getting more of the blood from the system, right? And I was a C-section baby. My mom there was a malpractice. She was given the wrong blood type, and then also was sent home with this newborn baby after being given the wrong blood type, turned on the TV. And when she saw on the TV that the news was talking about the fact that the blood system was tainted, that's how she found out she could be hepatitis or HIV positive.
Wow.
With a newborn baby and an infant child. And so I honestly believe that was like a portal that I was brought into this world. My mom was okay.
Mm-hmm.
She was okay. Mm-hmm. But for 1 year, you have to continue to go back to get tested. And you have to think about the fact that you're breastfeeding this baby. And are you both sick? And of course, in the 80s as well, we didn't have all of the understanding of, how to take care of your immune system. This is really more of a phenomenon now, right? So she wouldn't have even known some of the tools that she could have used to even support herself if she did have those things, because it wouldn't have been talked about. And her own family doctor, who she went to advocate for to get the testing from, felt informed by my mother because she had also had a blood transfusion during her C-section. And her light turned on and thought, oh, maybe I should go get tested for HIV and hepatitis. which is really the beginning of realizing that your doctors don't know everything either.
Yeah.
You know, their parents, they're business owners.
Totally.
They're busy too. And
facade of it.
Yeah. And like, there's this isn't a blame thing.
Yeah.
This is just an unfortunate situation.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say the TV, I want to be clear on what I mean by that, because I am going to refer to it a lot in telling my story. The TV to me is the media. Mm-hmm. It is now social media. It mm-hmm. is like celebrity culture. It is the government, and it is government TV, because we have that element in Canada, which you might be thinking, well, that sounds like Cuba or Venezuela. Yes, it does. Or China. Yeah, it does. And so we have to be clear on that. Our public broadcasting, our news stations, not only are supported by the government, but they received massive bonuses during COVID. Mm. So really, I'm brought onto this earth plane.
I almost controversial
lost
way.
My mother. Mm-hmm. And somehow that just gets swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And it was always a calling to me, probably in my late teen years, that it was always this voice in the back of my head about, like, what about the women and children? Mm. But you don't, like, what does that really mean? Yeah. You know, I'm not a soldier. I'm not in the Canadian military, but like, it was always this constant reminder. And at that time, the culture in Canada was more so, well, we worry about the mother and children over there in the developing world or the third world. Mm-hmm. And so I was always heavily involved internationally in supporting maternal health and maternal mortality. And that was like a really deep calling and knowing for myself, even though I wasn't a mother.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it happened immediately that I linked my birth to that calling, but I guess it became more clear to me when the COVID lockdowns first started. So that was March of 2020. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the first 2 weeks we were told to stay home and figure everything out. And, you know, that's all it's going to be. It's going to be 2 weeks. And
tell me, sorry, I'm going to stop you. Tell me about your political views before that.
I identify today as a recovering woke.
Okay. Interesting.
The recovering woke, born again hippie.
Okay. Well, some people consider woke and hippie the same thing.
That's fair.
Isn't that interesting?
Break it down.
It's just all about the stigma. Yeah, so tell us what that means.
So to me, woke culture in Canada is a part of this play on our compassion. So Canadians are known as being this very compassionate country, right? We've always had an open door policy to immigrants and refugees. And most people are not Indigenous to the lands. And unfortunately, the Indigenous people to the land were pushed out and put into other communities that were created for them, right? Mm-hmm. So similarly to the structure in the US, really. Mm-hmm. And they are brothers and sisters and cousins to the Indigenous people in the mm-hmm. US. And so, for example, our prime minister was voted in the first time on the understanding that he was going to finally bring clean water to these communities in Canada.
So you voted for him, obviously.
Of course you would.
Yeah.
Because I believe in that. We have a huge problem in Canada and US with missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. Mm-hmm. And so he was going to have this huge inquiry into how that was happening. Of course we want that to happen. Mm-hmm. He was calling in to have more women representation into the government so that there would be this equal voice at that time. And we're talking about, I can't remember the first election. It feels like he's been in power for far too long. But whatever the case was, we had gone from like a very conservative, and our conservative government is not as conservative as like the left here. Mm-hmm. It still holds a lot of like that, the essence of being Canadian, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of maple syrup in the blood of a conservative Canada.
I think it's the right here.
Sorry, the right. Yes. Yeah. So we would be, our conservatives are not as far right as you guys can identify as, but that doesn't mean that there isn't nuance in everything, right? So the woke culture is playing on your heartstrings is the best way to describe it. And it's like, of course I believe in all of these things. Of course I want to live in a country that does all of these.
Well, that's what's so interesting about politics. I feel like just within the last couple of years is what is right and left.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there is so much like I would have voted for him. You know what I'm saying? Like without even identifying whether he was, and I don't know if do you consider Democrat, Republican up there?
No, so it would be liberal and conservative.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what is that? What even is that now? So it's just interesting with the political climate, even in America right now. And I just wanted to touch on that because it's okay if you feel confused. And I know that like I am literally a mixing pot in what I believe. And it's some right, some left, it's some independent, like it's everything.
Because the reality is that we are all one, right? And so I've been in refugee camps in the Middle East. And the lesson I learned there is that we all want peace.
Yeah.
We all want sovereignty. We want healthy leaders to support our community. And community to me is a much smaller container than something on a world stage per se, because that's so, you'll hear in the story, it's so intangible that one man can rule this large land and convince people of what I believe is a lie.
Well, now you know.
Yeah.
That it is.
Right.
At least the receipts.
He lied about me.
Yeah.
That I can say that.
Yeah.
He lied about me.
Yeah.
And so if everybody really just wants a peace and a happy, healthy community, a beautiful home, a place where they can break bread together and live in harmony, which is more the case in this world today in 2024 than people want us to believe. Someone said it recently, this is not our grandfather's world. We're not all rushing to battle. And so what if a war was actually fought in 2022 with peace and love?
And it did. It did. Heather fought a war with peace and love, and we're about to share it. And it wasn't televised. I have chills all over my body right now. And it was.
It was.
And you were a part of it.
Yeah.
So let's hear about it.
So we have the initial lockdown in Canada. And again, you're playing on the heartstrings of people. We are told that the frontline workers are heroes. So that would include anyone in the healthcare system, people taking care of the elderly, and people cleaning. That I think that's always so important. We don't necessarily identify those people in our society, right? But like they're still working 24 hours around the clock. And then truckers, because at the end of the day, they're the people that are crossing the Canada, US, Mexico border and bringing your avocados to the grocery store in Canada. And we were hearing on the TV that people were not allowing the truckers to use their washrooms.
Like in the gas stations?
In gas stations and coffee shops. And that's a big part of Canadian culture, right? Coffee shops.
Interesting.
And truckers would be very loyal to these coffee shops.
So there's like places for them to shower in the coffee shops in Canada.
There would be in truck stops, but I would say that they probably stayed, the truck stops with showers probably stayed open, but the coffee shops, which is the brand Tim Hortons, that would be a place that the truckers are very loyal to. And they wouldn't have a shower in it, but the inside would be closed because it's unclean for you to use a washroom. Even though is what they're saying. Yeah. Right. And so these men and women continued to travel across our countries and bring us the goods that we needed to survive, right? And we're cheered on as heroes on the TV. And this continued on 2020, 2021. So 2021 was when the rollout of what I call the experimental medical procedure, or what is colloquially, what people know as the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, was rolled out in the beginning of 2021. And in Canada at that time, we didn't have the same supply of the vaccine that you guys did down here. And so we were told, we'll just get the first shot you can get. And it doesn't matter if you take A or B or you take 2 Bs. You just keep.
If it's Pfizer or whatever.
Exactly.
Just get a shot.
Yes. the first one available to you. And that was including people that were autoimmune deficient, right? And that was including very fragile elderly people who had already been locked up, locked in without proper healthcare for years. Our military had to come in to our elderly homes that were both publicly and privately run to help support the elderly during the lockdowns, because we didn't have good healthcare of the elderly. So what I'm doing right now is likely breaking down the illusions of Canada being this perfect place.
Yeah, I mean, before that, it was like, oh, Canada has free healthcare.
Right.
And as somebody who doesn't have health insurance and pays for things out of pocket because I'm an entrepreneur, it was totally like the illusion was so exciting.
Don't get me wrong. If you break your leg, we are so blessed. Because totally. I wouldn't even think about what that would cost. I can't even imagine.
There's pieces of that that's really amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what was happening also during that time that is important to recognize is that we were going through an election. So the rhetoric of an election and political parties speaking out about their beliefs and what they felt about what was happening in our country started playing out on the Canada-wide stage on the TV, that our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, believed that if you didn't get vaccinated, you were a right-wing extremist, a misogynist, a transphobe, a grandma killer. He never used that word or that phrase, but that is commonly what we were called, because you would be putting grandma at risk.
Like on the streets and stuff?
Yeah. And or, you know, heaven forbid, an unvaccinated person, you know, was visiting their grandmother and gave them COVID and they died. And a super spreader. And so these were common things that were being repeated during the election cycle on the TV. And then we were having this election during what was still the lockdowns. So even once, we're now in September of 2021. So by now, the majority of people that wanted to get a vaccine had had it and had had two, some maybe even three by that point. So when you're talking about body autonomy and sovereignty, those people had that. But what was happening at the same time was people's workplaces were putting in mandates that you could no longer work if you were not vaccinated, specifically in government jobs. Mm-hmm. So that would be, we call them provinces, which is a state in the US. So jobs that were municipal, provincial, or federal. And so this election was held in Canada. That in and of itself is very controversial, but we don't necessarily need to go there. Maybe if you watch the TV show Scandal, you could just imagine what happened during our election in 2021. And Justin Trudeau was voted back in after saying these things about people that, to be honest with you, we don't even really know the percentage of people that, one, were unvaccinated, or two, were under vaccinated. So people who took the first vaccine but didn't necessarily take the second
boosters,
one, right?
Yeah.
And also, or even just the second one, Sadie, before the booster. And also the people who had fake papers, because that's the world we ended up living in. And fake papers could be something you could make on your computer, or it could be something that was like literally like drug dealing, this underground world of giving cash to a person in a parking lot for them to then go to, my understanding was a pharmacy, register you into the system as vaccinated.
Wow.
And then you would have the proper legal government documentation saying that you had had these two vaccines to be able to keep your job.
So this isn't even at the point of like traveling, because we're still we're still pretty locked down. We're not going cross borders. No, we're just trying to hold jobs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a hotel quarantine, which was similar to Australia. So the hotel quarantine was government run. You were immediately taken. This is still during 2021, 2021, 2022. You were taken off of the airplane and taken to a quarantine facility. You were, in my understanding, forced to be tested if you wanted to leave that facility.
Yeah, you were there for a few weeks, right?
I think it would depend on what your tests were.
We had something similar here when we would go to Kauai often and stay there for multiple times. And we would stay in like these domes, like the hotel domes for Well, I mean, it was started at 2 weeks. I stayed on the property for 2 weeks at one point because we stayed there for a couple months in 2020. And then it was like, I think 7 days, and it went out to 3 days. And yeah.
I think what we have to talk about with that is like, what is that? Like, this is a form of a camp.
Yeah.
This is a
Yeah.
facility, a government
Yeah.
run.
Yeah.
You are taken from the airport, forced without your body autonomy and sovereignty to make a conscious choice of where you are choosing to sleep that night.
Mhm.
The government has decided for you.
Well, the government would claim that your autonomy was choosing to travel.
Right.
And at that point, I believed really deep. I was like, oh, they're just doing the best they can. They're protecting.
And again,
And that's really, it's the smoke and mirrors of like, we're all wanting peace. We all want people to live. We all want, but we also don't want to be forced to put something in our bodies that could be really, really terrifying and damaging to our mental and physical health.
Absolutely.
And it's like none of us have been a part of a pandemic before. So how the hell are we supposed to even know what?
Oh, I have, because we had SARS-1.
Oh,
we had OG
None
SARS.
of the Americans in my age.
No, New York had it too. But again, we don't talk about this, Sadie.
Yeah.
20 years ago, we had the OG SARS.
Interesting.
Which in my memory of that, I was 18, 19 years old, was that it was in the healthcare system. So the people that worked in healthcare needed to be properly protected, have the PPE, like that was the spread of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
So when we had started to hear about COVID this time around, that was where we were about to go on a Disney cruise, because to us, this was in hospitals because we'd already been through it.
Right.
So we weren't necessarily coming from this state of fear.
Yeah.
Even though we were hearing this trickle information. Right. So, and if really you were looking at the numbers and had been through the original SARS, you would see that it was in seniors' homes and the healthcare situation, right? That travel was not causing the spread.
Yeah.
The other important thing to point out is at a parallel of all of this is the province of Quebec. So Quebec is the French-speaking province of Canada. That when we talk about the propaganda just within Canada, Quebec is very othered to us. So because they're French speaking, they kind of identify more with France. And a lot of the things that I call the agenda that are played out in France are also played out in Quebec. And so Quebec had even more strict laws. So they were dealing, or I mean, can we even call them laws? Like these were like handwritten tickets because the law didn't exist. It hadn't gone through proper policy and procedure.
Totally.
Right?
It was like, what's today? Okay, no curfews today.
Curfews.
What's next? Yeah.
So Quebec's first curfew was that you had to be home by 7 p.m.
For like what point?
Because COVID spreads in the dark.
Yeah.
With the vampires and the wolves.
No, literally. And sunsets at 7 up there, I guess.
Well, it would have been even earlier because it was winter, right? And it's a little bit more north up there. And in my personal opinion at this point now too, I believe it is because Quebec is full of so many incredibly open-hearted, like red-blooded warriors that really, again, have this true essence of what it is to be Canadian in their blood, even though they are continually othered in our society.
Interesting.
So they had curfew tickets, and then so you would get a $1,500 ticket if you were out past the curfew. And you would have to have papers and documents to prove why you had a right of your body to be out of your home past 7 p.m. And then they also had much more strict policies, again, in my experience, of the mask mandates. So they would also receive tickets for not wearing a mask at the grocery store. They were forbidden from being able to shop at Walmart and Costco for being unvaccinated. So once the vaccine mandates rolled in, let's say October of 2021, Quebec, not all of Canada, were told that they would be vax passed at the door of Walmart. Okay. So imagine everybody is lining up again, just like the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And everybody is being identified. Why would you want that if you had been vaccinated? You should have been given your freedom back.
Yeah.
But you're back to these massive lineups again.
Yeah.
And then if you did go into the grocery store unvaccinated, you were put in a booth And you were only allowed to buy essentials, and someone would do the shopping for you. They would go and get these essentials for you and check you out, and you would be othered in society.
Wow.
So then you have Christmas again, Christmas 2021, and your prime minister has just told everybody that you are all of these terrible things. And
People are believing it because they're scared.
People are believing all of it.
Yeah.
And
how could you be so selfish to not do this for the community?
And to not even have a conversation about what that could look like. And I want to mention that, again, back to this calling that's always been in the back of my mind. What about the women and children? I was incredibly frightened about this experimental procedure being used on pregnant women and 6-month-old babies.
Yeah, we just have no idea.
And this is still common practice in Canada in April of 2024. These are still considered part of the scheduled medical procedures that a 6-month-old baby would receive and a pregnant woman would receive. So, and as a community member in the beginning of the lockdowns, we have this in common. Today, we're going to go to a women's shelter together. This is how I was brought up in the community. At the very beginning of COVID, the first thing I thought was women, especially immigrant women in Canada, have 2 or 3 jobs. So they have their regular 40 to 50 hour a week job. Then they would work in service for an extra 12 to 20 hours a week. And that's the money that they need to, 1, be able to afford to live in Canada, 2, be able to afford to send money back home to their communities to support them, and 3, for the things that women have to pay for that society doesn't pay for us. And that's period products, which is another thing you and I have in common. So I created the Period Box. And it was based on a mother-daughter team out of Philadelphia who had been doing this previous to COVID. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like we need to deliver period products to women who now don't have this extra income. And in doing so, we need to create community and a talking point around that. And so I took savings, I took coupons, I called family and friends, and these are people who know this true essence of Heather. What about the women and the children? And everyone would they would even put like tampons in my dad's trunk, tampons in my ex-husband's trunk,
so
like
cute.
and our spare room was like floor to ceiling of period products, right?
Wow.
To drive around. And the number one rule was you had to be home when I delivered this box to you. I wanted to see you eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart. And this is also, again, before I'm even having my reawakening.
Yeah.
But I had always thought that this heart to heart part of Heather was a personality disorder. But I was obviously working on her at that point because I knew this wasn't right, that people were locked in, locked up, and that communities needed our support. And what I found driving around in my neighborhood of Ajax, Ontario, was that we're dealing with multi-generational women in a home who cannot afford the rent that they have and who all have different issues with their menstrual or female body parts. And I was being asked to support incontinence as well, which is a very expensive problem that women have, because now you're dealing with urine. It's even more of a difficult thing. So I was learning more about my own community in this time. And everyone around me knew I was doing this and that this is the essence of Heather.
Yeah.
And yet somehow this creeping propaganda and lies that were being told about us, people were leaning more on believing that than they were on remembering who Heather was.
Or people in general.
And people in general.
So tell me, first of all, thank you for doing the work of those boxes. Of course you are. You are the salt of the earth. I love you. But I want to know, I mean, it's clear now without even being said that obviously you weren't vaccinated, but tell me why you weren't initially. Like, what was it? Because you said you weren't really like woke, you weren't really right or left. Like, did you just have a feeling?
I would definitely say I had a feeling. I wanted to wait until, first of all, I'm young, I'm healthy, I take good care of myself. So I felt like because the supply in Canada wasn't that good anyways, what was really the point of rushing in? I believed that they were messing it up so badly that then you would end up having to be put into this whole new schedule of getting these injections. That didn't sit well with me. So I wanted to wait. And the other curiosity was like, well, where are the numbers? And by this point too, I have a huge community all over the world, and nobody had died that I personally knew, or one step away from me. So far, why
Nothing's
would it
checking out?
Yeah. And also this is a really important piece too. I live near a nuclear power plant.
Okay, wow. Side note. Casual.
And the government supplies us with nuclear power plant pills, which are iodine.
Wow.
Okay. So when you live in the neighborhood, yeah, this is really important, Sadie, because you want to talk again about like universal healthcare and like the government taking care of you and everything.
Totally.
So I could see on a world stage that there were governments that were giving people vitamin D, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, zinc. They were giving people the opportunity to be outside. In Canada, our play gyms outside our playgrounds were covered in police tape.
Yeah.
So
yeah, ours were closed too.
Right. And so again, nothing is making any sense.
Yeah.
And the only thing that they're telling me I should do is to take this vaccine. I'm not okay with that. And this might be controversial. I don't know if it's the first controversial thing I've said, but I still wanted the opportunity to have children. And we didn't know what kind of impact this experimental medical procedure would have on the female reproductive system.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
I think I was really at the beginning of really calling in healing my own womb and becoming a womb healer. And the first place that comes from is listening to her.
And that is how you knew.
Yeah.
And also it's so sad that speaking of sovereignty or privacy, there was none.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
You know, that's like a whole piece. Of course, like here's beautiful Heather giving these period products, but somehow we know everyone's vaccine status.
100%. And it was like emailed.
Yeah. Signed, sealed, delivered.
Yes.
You might as well stitch a letter on you.
Thank you. That's really so this was where it was like heading.
I mean, the climate and social media, I will also note this, like, although we didn't know each other at the time, and of course mine wasn't as extreme, was just as heightened. It was so, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I could say because as I would argue, most people were confused. They just didn't know, but they were also scared. And so it's like, I mean, that's the world. That was the world then.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to trust that I believe in this. I'm going to trust when the church that I grew up in is promoting this situation. It's like, what is it? Like, it is like, I believe one of the very first moments we got to have as a worldwide people to really start to actually strengthen the muscle of our intuition. I mean, and that really is, you're seeing it more and more because at least what I feel is that like things have not calmed down. Will they? Who the hell knows? At this point, I can't hope for that. What I can hope is that my intuition continues to strengthen. And so what we can honor and be grateful for is that everybody is like, okay, you're on your own, kid, in essence, because what is even real? What is even true? Where are the facts? Things are moving so quickly, there isn't room for facts other than your own womb and your own knowing. And that's what we all got baptized into.
Yeah.
And some at more degree than others, and some with the more of a privilege, because we have to also talk about the privilege that we have, or at least that I had as a wealthy white woman to have. I will never forget when I got COVID. I will never forget it. It was the winter of 2021. It was 2021. And I have my sauna, and I have my zinc, and I have my vitamin D, and I have my diffusers and my teas and my red lights. This disease, wherever it came from, is targeting people in poverty that are told to stay inside, that don't have a spouse or a partner to get up out of their apartment, to get out of the stuffiness, to go look at the sun and walk, which is literally what could have cured So many. And of course, it's heightened in the wintertime. Of course, that's when it runs rapid. It's such a sad moment. So I want to give a moment for those people who, if there was a glimmer of hope through a vaccine, why the hell not? So even being able to be like, I don't actually know if that's true. I feel like that was a privilege for me to even question that.
Absolutely.
And so I hope that, I mean, we haven't even got to the best part of your story, but I just felt so called to like share all that, because ultimately what we're doing here and what the world is doing here is giving us opportunities to really be like, okay, what do I believe? What do I believe in? And hopefully with this platform, and hopefully with our voices, and hopefully with our missions to help women, we can help the underprivileged to trust that they do have choices.
And I also want to say that if you were in, I mean, there's so many stories with this, but like if you are a pregnant woman who felt that you needed to take this because you were going into a medical facility,
Totally.
of course I understand.
I know there's so many, it's of course, and of course you sharing your story doesn't invalidate any of that.
No, I wanted the nuance of everything.
Totally.
I wanted all of the stories, all of the experiences to be heard.
And we all want to be right. Like, I want that vaccine that you're getting to actually help you.
Yep.
Like,
absolutely.
And then I want to be able to not want it and like not be persecuted for that as well.
Yes. So we're now so this is really interesting also
Christmas.
What you were saying, Sadie. Yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like energy, like let's really get into that, because again, I'm not necessarily, I've just started, I've just started like manifesting a spiritual community, not even really knowing what that meant. We were meeting illegally in homes and having sound baths and ecstatic dances.
But you hadn't done that before COVID.
I had done like a few things and had like very profound experiences, but didn't really completely understand what it was. I was like, why is it that I'm just lying there listening to like a ding dong and like I feel this thing happening inside of me? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
This is way better than yoga. I don't have to move.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like the world has lifted off my shoulders. So and it was beautiful because I was living in a suburb of Toronto, but and this group was meeting in that suburb, so you didn't have to go back into the city. Because what's important to note is Toronto is the most locked down city outside of China.
Like always, or just in COVID?
During COVID.
Okay.
So also, what does that tell us, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? Again, I always think like there's something special and unique about Toronto, because Toronto is somewhere where everybody lives.
Have you looked into like the ley lines or like the portals or the energy there? I'm so curious.
I know,
like,
I haven't. In Ottawa too, right? Exactly. I haven't. That's all new language to me in the last, sort of 8 months.
Of course.
But definitely feel that. And if anything, I feel like when we're doing our own work and we're in our own heart and our own sovereignty, we become the ley line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our truth that is allowing our heart and our kindness and our compassion for our community, even if they turn their backs on you, just standing still in your truth that you are love and you can still have love and compassion for the people that didn't have it for you.
Yeah.
And so coming from like here I am having this reawakening, and I'm feeling this like intense dark shadowy experience of like, oh my God, maybe I just need to take this thing to be free.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how much longer I can do this. Mm-hmm. To the point that I also have friends whose children were suicidal because as parents, they weren't necessarily wanting their children to take an experimental medical procedure, and their children were being left out of society. They couldn't play hockey. They couldn't do karate. Their friends, again, there was no privacy, so they weren't welcome over to their friend's house to play. Completely othered from society. And so when you're living in a community and a country where this rhetoric is continued to be repeated and, flashing across the bottom of the screen all day long that, you need to protect yourself, continue to wear a mask. These people are bad. It just got so heavy and so intense. And there was the first big protest was January 22nd, 2022. And this was a worldwide freedom protest. So this was happening all over the world. But again, not all of us know about this. And really, the idea of it is to raise the vibration of the earth.
I love that it was that date too. January 22nd,
Thank
2022.
you. I know, right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so here we were walking in Toronto.
So you decided to protest?
This was, yes. And this is the first protest I attended. And though I had been, a lot of what we were seeing again on the TV about protesting in Canada was these people that looked bizarre and strange, and they wanted to hug people on the street. And to me, again, as someone who's thinking, but we need to protect everyone, we need to be safe, we need to respect people's boundaries, which if I was coming to your home and you had you wanted me to be 6 feet apart or talk to you outside the window, I didn't break anybody's rules.
You were respectful of that, obviously.
Exactly. So, but this seemed even more bizarre to me. Why would these people be walking around wanting to hug people in the middle of a pandemic, right? And now in hindsight, I adore and love these people for, again, beginning this war with peace and love.
Yeah.
So deeply, because they were holding what we say in the movement was holding the line for us to prepare for more of us to show up. So the first one was January 22nd, 2022. We're protesting in Toronto. And what's important to note, I looked it up. It was on average minus 30 Celsius, which is minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. It's an average winter temperature in Canada at that point. And you're marching through the streets with Canadian flags, and we were not just, I don't even want to use that word. We were asking for freedom. This had escalated to a point of, I honestly, truly inside my body believed that the government could come to my home and inject me without my consent or take me without my consent, because this was already, in a sense, happening. And so and also, who was going to protect me at this point? If not me, who? And how do you even protect yourself from something like that? I didn't suddenly become an MMA fighter. And the only thing I know how to fight anything with is love.
Yeah.
That's always been who I am.
Yeah.
And so that week, the trucks had already started moving. And so when I say this, imagine from California all the way to Washington, D.C., we had trucks moving from Vancouver Island all the way across Canada, from the north of Canada. We call it the territories in northern Canada. We have 3 territories. So you would have to drive south to a province to then cut across the country. And the trucks started moving for, I believe it was about 7 to 10 days across Canada, creating a convoy. So this is an important terminology. This is what they call the Freedom Convoy. The line of trucks became so long, they don't even know how long it was. And they had it all mapped out as to where they would rally in the evenings to sleep, where they would eat, where they would refuel. And they were driving from the west coast of Canada to our capital, which is Ottawa, Ontario.
So the trucks became a part of the protest.
Yes. So what had happened was the trucks were a hero, let's say on the 20th of January, and then they were considered a bad person, a super spreader, right-wing, far-right extremist for being unvaccinated as of January 23rd.
Right.
And this was being said again by the leaders in our provinces and our country. And they had put in a vaccine mandate to be able to cross the Canada-US border, which would have meant that the truckers would be delayed, slowed down. And these are people that are working independently. If they're not moving the goods, they're not making money. They would have to quarantine, all of these kinds of things. And it wasn't, in my opinion, I wouldn't have said it was very clear what was going to happen to them. And what was happening when this was sort of the tipping point of who decided to rally and create this convoy and cross Canada was they were sick and tired of all the lies. And again, we don't even know the number of truckers who were and were not vaccinated, because I don't believe any of the numbers from the government, because like I described to you, people could buy papers.
Yeah.
So what is the truth?
Yeah.
And why does it even matter? This is your own personal medical information. So the trucks start moving. They get to Ottawa. Sorry, I don't even want to speed that part up. As they're moving across the country, people are coming out in the tens of thousands. And you can see this on YouTube, tens of thousands, to stand on the side of the highway, the Trans-Canada Highway.
Thank goodness for YouTube, because this was never aired on any news channel. Now, I don't watch the news, but I'm highly educated in social media. I'm always on, obviously, with my job, and I always see news there. We didn't see any of this.
Right. And the rhetoric on the TV at that time, if you were turning it on, was that we were basically heading towards what would be the equivalent of January 6th in the US, that they were coming to take down the government. But the truth, when you look at the videos on YouTube, is you see grandmothers and Indigenous people and people of all kinds of ethnicities, because this is Canada. Literally one of everyone in the world lives in Canada, from every country, every age, every religion. Would be standing on these highways, waving Canadian flags, giving food, giving money, like literally just cash to people, because they knew that this was going to be expensive. You're gassing up trucks and you're headed to the capital. So on January 27th, I was standing on the side of the highway in Vaughan, Ontario. And I didn't really know what to expect, because again, here I am at this point where I have this spiritual community, but I don't necessarily have a freedom fighting community. And it's just me. And so I go to the side of the highway. We're at a Bass Pro
Love
shop. And there are tens of thousands of people standing on the side of the highway, waiting for trucks to come down the highway and honk their horns for a minute, because they're heading to Ottawa. And we're talking about a bridge that was 16 lanes of highway wide. And there is not a space for another person to fit on this highway bridge, waving flags. They set off fireworks when the trucks came.
They're just so happy to find
to
hope.
To know you're not alone.
Yeah.
And again, there's no passport to participate in any of this. And also to have this, again, this sovereignty of your body to meet in community again, because we weren't doing that, right? This isn't a baseball game or something that would normally bring a large mass of people together. The government wasn't allowing that to happen, because when large masses of people get together, people talk, people put down their phones, and they connect heart to heart.
Yeah.
And they don't want that, even if it's through a snowsuit.
Totally.
So
minus 20 degrees. I can't even imagine.
So I jump back in my car and I start heading home.
Okay, wait, but I want to know the moment the trucks came by. So how many trucks did you see?
Okay, this is actually a terrible. Okay, well, this is
or was there
funny.
only one?
Exactly, because I was on the wrong highway.
Oh, with all the tens of thousands of people?
So you have all the people, but we didn't have as many trucks. Okay,
oh
but
gosh,
this is a bit of like a suspenseful moment.
Okay,
you're like, oh, well, then there was only like one or two. Like, what's the big deal? Now, there was a parking lot at the Bass Pro. You guys can imagine this, like Bass Pro parking lot. So there were people that were creating a convoy that were leaving from there. So I had seen some of the trucks that had been parked there and had started to drive towards Ottawa. Right?
I think I like that part of the story better, because that gives you even. That just shows how much your faith even is, because we know how many did end up showing up. But at that point,
you're like,
there's like, it's like one. That would be terrifying for me. I'm like, I have faith, God help me.
So I get on the main highway in Toronto that cuts across the top of the city. That is a much better artery to be on to see what was happening.
Okay.
And I am in, this is only Thursday, I'm in tens of convoys, tens. And a convoy means that it's kind of like at a funeral procession where the lights are and it's trucks, there's cars, there's everything. So everybody is just heading to Ottawa, and this is Thursday. So I see I'm weaving in and out of these convoys, and you're crying. Like just this emotional release, because you're finally out of the shadow of like,
you're not alone.
Yeah. And like the that you weren't wrong, like that you weren't a bad person
or crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I go home and I'm like, I'm going to go to Ottawa.
Okay, so tell me, how far away is that? I have no idea.
Ottawa is a 4-hour drive from where I live.
And you're like, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I've seen all these people. I'm jumping in my 2009 Honda Civic, and I'm gonna go to Ottawa.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Because if I don't go, they've already lied about me. What are they going to say about this?
Yeah.
The only way to know the truth is to see it myself, right? And to experience it myself. And so Friday, I jump in my car, and I'm again, I'm still driving in and out of convoys so this is now a day later. There are still more convoys of trucks coming through the same main highway, and are driving really slowly with the lights flashing and everything, trucks, cars, all the things. People are driving with porta potties because they're towing porta potties with them because they're expecting to be there for a while. And I get to a gas station, gas stop thing. And I go into the bathroom and I have this like realization and this like moment of fear again. One, every other sink in the bathroom is covered by a garbage bag. So we know the most important thing we could do during COVID was wash our hands, but yet we have to still socially distance.
Yeah.
And two, I'm honestly wondering, am I a far right extremist,
Totally.
Nazi, misogynist?
Are they calling you those things?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Same information that you would hear about people that participated in January 6th. And it's everybody and everything. You cannot paint someone with one brush. You cannot paint one community with one brush, especially not when you're representing your whole country. And so I get to Ottawa, and it's Saturday morning, and I go into the downtown core, and there are hundreds of thousands of people and trucks.
How many trucks? How many semi-trucks?
Oh my God.
Hundreds?
Thousands.
Wow.
Thousands. Because we
there?
couldn't even see them all. Yeah, because you couldn't see them all because some of them ended up in farmers' fields outside of town because they wanted to be there in essence to participate, but they didn't necessarily want to park right downtown in front of Parliament, right? Or the police couldn't fit any more of them in because they're big. And
how did they get in the first place? Like, how did the government?
They were ushered in. If they knew we were coming. We have a right to peaceful protest in Canada. So they knew, I mean, it takes 10 to 7 days to cross the country in a convoy.
Wow. So they were ready for you.
So they were ready. And what I want to point out, my understanding and my belief is that at this point, they had already kind of put in a bit of a plan to cause a bit of chaos in the city of Ottawa. Ottawa itself is a quiet city at the best of times, but it was even more quiet because most of the people that live and work there work in the government, and they were a part of the laptop culture. They were working from home in their PJs. So they weren't necessarily in that downtown core of Ottawa, though they would have said that we were disrupting and hurting people and causing chaos. So really, if they had lined up the trucks more on these streets that were the streets of government buildings and so forth, these buildings were empty, and the noise and the partying that we were having for 3 weeks wouldn't have necessarily caused so much of a controversy.
Disruption. Disturbance.
Yeah.
You were there for 3 weeks?
Okay, so I was there for what we all call the first weekend. So that's everybody arriving. And this is really everyone being like, oh my God.
This is real.
Oh, this is real. We're not alone. Also breaking down this illusion, again, talking about Quebec, that Quebec being this predominantly French province, they don't fly Canadian flags. They fly their own flag.
Oh, interesting.
But Quebec is bordered on the Ottawa border. So for them to come over for the day or for 3 weeks was super easy for them because they're right there. And they were flying Canadian flags.
Wow.
So we had all become one in this movement, right? And people in Western Canada were hearing about how these people had tens of thousands of dollars of tickets for their curfews and their lockdowns and everything. And they were realizing that they had so much in common with one another that they didn't want us to know about, because it wasn't just trucks sitting in trucks and honking horns. There was a constant movement of people, of goods, of food, of supplies, of cash. All of these things were going on. I mean, and also fun. We had bouncy castles. We We had arm wrestling. We had indigenous drummers. We had Bible gatherings, like and little pilgrimages on a Sunday, and we had a stage like you would at a protest. We had a stage where people could come and stand on their soapbox and share their story and share their struggles. And by this point, this was including everybody.
I was going to say, was this including vaccinated and unvaccinated?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Because luckily we hadn't created a policy yet where we had it stitched on our arm.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
Yeah. We were just fighting for autonomy.
Right. And it's so cold that your cell phone freezes.
And still thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Tens, if not hundreds. I mean, they don't want us to know how many numbers, but they know. Just similarly to something that happens in Washington, D.C., based on how many hotel rooms are booked out, how busy restaurants are, things like that. You can estimate how many people have come into the city of Ottawa. But they didn't want us to know, because if we knew, then again, the rest of Canada at the beginning of this, at the first weekend, would have realized, oh my God, I'm not the only one that thinks this isn't the way we should be treating our neighbors and our family members.
That was one of the poisons around the pandemic, was it's me against them.
Right. And so, and it didn't, I mean, I don't even really remember. No, I do remember stories of people sharing. Also by this point too, we were hearing that people were injured or killed from the vaccine. And so this was a place where those people could speak freely about their experience. As a parent whose son took the vaccine so he could play hockey and his son died. He was alone.
You're listening to these.
You're listening to these. These people are on the stage. They have a truck decorated with the information about what had happened to them and who their son was, because the government was denying that these things had even happened, or were trying to pay people out and hush them up. In my own household, a dear one to me, they had been ill from the vaccine, and they were given government compensation for vaccine illness.
Interesting.
And that had happened in September of 2021. We're now in February 2022. So there wasn't a denial of the fact that people were getting ill from this procedure. Really what it was that if you didn't take it, you weren't good.
Yeah.
And it didn't really matter.
Or you just didn't have a choice.
And you didn't, you'd already lost your job at this point too. So 3 weeks.
Wow.
In Ottawa. Every day was so incredibly magical.
And 3 weeks of truckers not going and getting goods and making money, right?
For these guys, exactly. And gals, for sure. They were there on their, this is how a war of, I hate that word, war, the world war, a battle of, that is fought with peace and love is also fought to your detriment, right? Like you can lose everything, and you're willing to sacrifice all of that for your country, for everyone, for the elderly people that are locked into the seniors' homes, for the pregnant women that didn't know that this could hurt them and their baby, and for the people that had lost their jobs, and for the truckers that now couldn't cross the border.
Yeah.
So from a spiritual perspective, we were living in 5D and the new earth. Everything we needed, we had. We were living in pure love, and they didn't know how to fight back against that. That's really the truth of what had happened, because there was so much peace. There was so much community that the police of Ottawa couldn't even find something wrong. And of course, like everything, they try and pick on this one flag or this person doing, one odd person out of tens of thousands of people doing something out of the ordinary or disrespectful. But what was happening was the truckers and the veterans were getting together, and they were shoveling the snow in the city, and they were policing these places because they didn't want that to be their reputation. That's not what they were there for. They were there until the mandates were lifted. Now, the other argument people would make in calling us freedomers is that the mandates were provincial or state mandates. Yes, some of them were. But the trucker mandate was a federal mandate. My ability to fly within my country and to be able to fly out of my country was a federal mandate. The ability to be able to go to a restaurant or to the movie theater or a hockey game, that would be a provincial mandate. So what started to happen was the provincial mandates were being taken away and being we were given an end date for when those were to happen. Now we're at the capital of our country fighting, having our voice heard against the federal government.
Yeah.
So why is the provincial governments, why are they changing their mandates? What kind of power do people have when they're sitting there peacefully honking some horns, eating the ethnic foods of all the cultures of Canada, holding Bible study on a Sunday, or of all the religions that are in Canada, holding these services and respecting the lands that we're on? We were just living and being in the moment and waiting for our government to respond to us. They held the leaders. Now, leaders is a loose word, because what is a leader? When you have a freedom movement like this, there isn't necessarily a leader. No one told me to go there. I wasn't signed up to some organization. I was Heather in her 2009 Honda Civic driving to Ottawa. That's it. Nobody paid for my accommodations. Nobody supported me. And I wasn't financially supporting anyone as a whole. But the leaders who were sort of self-identified and were people who had helped with getting the convoy across Canada and who had a big social media following, they were holding conferences to have the government come and speak with our representation, and no one ever showed up. So that after 3 weeks, and
from the government.
And what's important to note is that our government was still sitting. Okay, so what does that mean? Our government system is based similarly to the British government system. So when I say they were sitting, they were still in the House of Commons holding parliamentary debate for I think it was like 16 or 18 of the days that we were in Ottawa. So they were the distance from you to me, I could get to our parliament peacefully. And they were walking in and out of the door in front of the trucks and the bouncy castles and everything.
Wow.
And so there was no threat to destroy the government. Nobody wanted that. They wanted the rights and freedoms of Canadians to be continued to be upheld. And for the person who we and the party we had voted into government to represent what we had voted them in to represent.
Right, of course.
And so on, I can't even do these 3 weeks justice. I would highly recommend going to YouTube and looking up the Freedom Convoy. I'd love to give a shout out to Bright Light Media, Bright Light News. He put together this incredible compilation recently to talk about what had happened when the government declared war against us, that has now been deemed illegal. But I am jumping ahead here, but I would recommend that. It really gives you a whole picture of who was included in all of this, and that there wasn't some mastermind behind what we were all representing.
Yeah.
And so on February 14th, 2022, the Canadian government declared war against its own citizens.
What does that mean?
So it is now called the Emergencies Act. At the time, previously it was called the War Measures Act. And the idea was that the government would have complete overreaching power of the whole country to implement whatever they needed to do in case of an emergency.
Oh, yes. Okay.
To put in place measures to protect people. And this had not ever been used during all of COVID. So how is it that they would use this against us? Now, there is the counter argument that there had been other smaller groups that had convened at the border. So they were at the Windsor-Detroit border on the Canadian side, and at the Coutts border, also on the Canadian side, that's in Alberta, Windsor-Detroit being in the province of Ontario. But the police had gone in and had cleared these things out peacefully. So the measures that you have in a country that has police and laws, and you cannot disrupt a border and all of these kinds of things, that was dealt with appropriately. And again, there's no major leader that's saying, oh, let's all go clog the borders. No, these were individuals who maybe lived closer to there than they could get to Ottawa and thought this was a way that they could peacefully protest. And then they found out it wasn't, and so they stopped. And if they were doing something illegal, they were arrested, or they were suspected of doing something illegal, they were arrested. And so both of the borders had been cleared out, but we were all still in Ottawa. And so on Valentine's Day, The government declared the Emergencies Act was the last tool that they had available to use against us. And that's when the real threats started. So I was in Ottawa at this point. I was there the first weekend, and then I was there for another 2 weeks after that. And the threats started with just papers that were coming out, which is propaganda. That was not anything official. It's just like a laminated paper that says, the police are telling you to leave the area. The police are telling you to leave the area. And every day this was repeated to us. And there's no signature of a certain police chief. At that time, the police chief in Ottawa had changed because the government didn't like the way the police chief was running things in Ottawa, because it was peaceful and we were getting comfortable and the weather was going to get warmer and we were going to be there until the mandates.
Yeah, you guys were determined.
Had ended.
Yeah.
So, and we were becoming more and more resourceful. And at the meantime, too, we had a GoFundMe. The government had shut that down. $10 million was confiscated from that. Then we had a Give, Send, Go. That was also confiscated. We were raising $10 million in days.
What?
Yeah.
And it was all confiscated?
Confiscated. It's all held in, what is it when it's held by like the lawyers and
Yeah.
in like escrow.
Yes.
It's all held in escrow right now. This is all still being fought over, this money. So again, when you ask, the truckers aren't moving the goods and doing all the things, like, yeah. And they also didn't even have access to these donations that people had received. I also want to point out that even within the people that represent our government federally, provincially, and municipally, there were people that you could see publicly supporting us whose family members are in our government.
Yeah, of course.
Because again, this isn't... We're all human. We all have difference of opinions in our own
freedom.
families.
Yeah,
exactly.
Wild.
So the government came in with what I would call military police. This started on Friday, I think it was February 18th. And they just came in with absolute full disturbing force. Like that shadow that I had felt had been lifted in the January when I went to my first protest had come in twice as heavy. And they created these military lines in the city of Ottawa with military machinery, military guns against civilians who were holding flowers, and veterans who were wearing their veteran pins and honors, nurses, doctors, police, average people, truckers. Most of the truckers, I remember, were staying in the trucks because the idea was that the protesters were protecting the truckers. They wanted to be the front of the line as the police came and attacked us. So what they were doing was they were saying, "We love you. Join us. It just takes one of you. Come to the other side. We're here for you." You know, the vaccine mandate for the Ottawa police was lifted while we were in Ottawa.
Interesting.
We're here for your family.
Yeah.
And I asked people, I did not have the ability, the guts to stand on that exact front line. But I've asked people who have, and they truly believed for hours and hours of saying, "Please join us. I love you. We love you. We only want what's best for our community." They truly believed someone would step over the line. And unfortunately, they didn't. They just kept coming at us with more and more force, rubber bullets. They were particularly targeting journalists.
Mm.
What does that sound like?
Wow.
Especially journalists that were sharing a more
open-minded approach.
Yeah. And come from more maybe conservative news outlets.
Mm-hmm.
They brought in the RCMP. So the RCMP are what Canadians, what people around the world would think of again as like Canadiana. So these are the guys in red with the hats and the horses and everything in the red suits. And they trot along on their horses. They brought in the RCMP, and the RCMP were using the horses to attack the civilians. And
to break up the protest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they ran over a man and an Indigenous grandmother.
Oh my gosh.
Who was in a scooter.
What?
Yeah. This is all on the internet. I'm not exaggerating. We don't know what happened to the man.
This is proof.
We don't even know the man's
There's
name.
proof of this.
We just know him as the man with the striped hat. And I mean, to be up front there, you have to have had some serious like guts to be up there. So, and these were people that again were repeating, "We love you, join us," freedom. And so eventually these lines of the police and the protesters moved back, and then they started attacking the truckers. So they were busting into the trucks, beating up the truckers, smashing their home. A trucker's truck is their home. It was also where they had their children, because we're still dealing with lockdowns and mandates and all of those things. So oftentimes children were traveling with if they were under the age of 4 anyways, they would have been traveling with their family in their trucks. And so the women and children had left and were in safer places. But I got ahead of myself here. The government, and again, you can find this easily on my Instagram page. The government were threatening to take the children and take truckers' dogs.
Oh, that's so sad. What in the world?
If you didn't
just because they all wanted them to leave, obviously.
Yeah, these were continuing threats. And like to threaten to take someone's children is also this PTSD of what we did to the Indigenous communities in Canada. So that in and of itself is disgusting. And if I was feeling a month previous that the government could come to my home and take me, and now they're saying they're going to come and take your child and your dog, I wasn't wrong. There's the physical force that we're experiencing. The truckers' trucks are smashed up. They're being physically abused and beaten up by the government police. But also they debanked the truckers and the protesters.
So they were able to find out their names.
Yes.
Because took money from their bank accounts?
They locked everything. So a debanking means that one, all of your bank accounts are locked. So now your mortgage isn't being paid back home. And let's say your wife was back home and she needed to buy groceries. She has no access to credit cards or debit cards. Also, their insurance, they had threatened to take away the special licensings that they have on their trucks to be able to do the work that they do. Their credit score was erased. And their credit history.
These are truckers.
Guilty until proven is innocent. So you would think that would mean then that they were taken to a jail and that they were prosecuted like someone who had broken the law. The majority weren't. The majority were taken to a facility, released in the middle of a cold, middle of nowhere field place, nowhere that you could access transportation. So people were getting together and helping convoy these guys and gals back to the city. And now they didn't have their home because their trucks were taken and confiscated and locked up.
They took their trucks too.
They took them for a week and then also gave them a ticket for towing them.
What?
So now a week later, they had to go back and ask the same police that had beat the shit out of them, could I please have my home back? Could I please have my livelihood back? I don't even have a bank account to even pay for these tickets, which you had to pay for on the spot, and a promissory note that said that you would never return back to the city of Ottawa. So there was as a general, there was not a large judicial procedure in figuring out who was guilty and who wasn't guilty. There were people that were put in prison as political prisoners and did go through processes for that. That's a whole other story. But when we're talking about what the Emergencies Act, the war that the government put against its own people, that in and of itself was then, it never went through proper parliamentary procedures. So though Justin Trudeau's government said, yes, this is now happening, this is official, it had to go through the Senate and it got stopped there and it never became law or put in place. And so it just ended. It was, and then it wasn't.
But they still attacked.
Exactly. And it is in my opinion that the reason why they needed to rush it at that point was, one, obviously we had been there for 3 weeks in peace and love, and they were running out of things to say bad about us. And you know, as much as you can use Antifa to make things not look good, when you're living in this peace and love bubble, nobody really wants to hurt you either. They want to be in the peace and love bubble with you.
Totally.
And so the other thing that was happening was spring break was starting for us. It starts in March. So that would have meant that people who were in Western Canada, they could have all jumped in their RV and driven to Ottawa and again seen with their own two eyes the truth of what was happening, not just what they saw on the TV. And so I think that scared them, that they knew more people were going to come and more of the truth was going to be known across the country. And so they had to shut it down. Don't forget, when the trucks were taken too, we still couldn't get on planes, trains, or buses because you had to be vaccinated and have your papers.
So tell me what happened. Like what came of the protest? Did anything come of the protest?
The protest itself, a lot of people, everybody left, obviously, because they had shut down the city. So we could no longer physically protest again at that time. A lot of other protests picked up across Canada. But more importantly was we went back 2 months later, and we went back to, in a sense, for lack of a better way of explaining it, almost like send love back to the ley lines after we had been attacked, and bring love back to these lands where we had celebrated for 3 weeks. And so we had a weekend-long ceremony where we honored our veterans, because our veterans had been attacked by the government police. These were people that had fought wars for our rights and freedoms in Canada and in other countries. And also for the bikers. The bikers were another big part of the freedom movement. They also have a lot of false things said about them. And so the Bikers Church in Ottawa was an incredible place that people could go for safety and warmth and food and care during the protest and after the protest. And so the bikers wanted to come and ride their bikes to send love back to the lands there. And so we did. And the government police came back out at us with their big guns and tried to scare us and push us up against counter protesters and cause chaos. But you can't win when you have grandmas and puppies and balloons.
Yeah.
And I'm wearing, heart scarves and all of those kinds of things.
So were you able to implement anything to change any of the mandates? Did any of them change?
Yes. So all of the provincial mandates ended, which meant that I could go to a restaurant and to a hockey game.
So it worked.
But I still could not travel. So the federal mandates, which were the reason why the truckers were there, the truckers mandate got dropped. They didn't have to be vaccinated across the border.
Okay.
But the actual, yes, for sure. The federal mandates to be able to fly within Canada or take a train or leave Canada, that didn't end until June of 2022.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it started a movement.
Oh, 1,000%.
A huge one.
Yeah.
That no one even knew about. I mean, thousands of trucks. Are you kidding me?
It had a ripple effect that there was a huge movement in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it was the farmers that really kicked off over there. They now have a parliamentary representation of the farmers and truckers and have a voice in their parliament as this freedom movement.
I mean, it makes so much sense. The truckers are the only reason why we have anything. It's actually like so beautiful.
So to go from calling them heroes to calling them all of these horrific things, it doesn't even make any sense. And at the end of the day, you're going to go to your Tim Hortons and see a trucker next time who's getting his coffee and think, wow, like, was this guy a bad guy? Or did this guy, like, what would have been the opposite? What if the mandates had gotten even more strict, Sadie?
Well, I mean, you think about that with anybody that the media tells you that is bad or wrong or is right. Who's to say?
Of course.
Who let them have the microphone and call them God and tell me to make this whole culture bad or this whole culture, it's just so wild, the power of the media.
And now here we are on the anniversary of the convoy 2 years later. The Emergencies Act went through the parliamentary procedure. Sorry, it didn't go through the parliamentary. It went through the court system. And the judge found that it was deemed illegal, that our government illegally declared war against us.
Wow.
And
And then what? And now what?
What does that mean? And why are Canadians not more outraged by this and asking questions and asking for an election so that we can hold our government responsible for what they did? And it doesn't, again, I hope people are understanding this doesn't have to do with vaccinated and unvaccinated. This has to do with breaking up families, breaking up communities, painting people with one paintbrush. And not only that this is still really hurting people right now. I still have family members that don't speak to me and friends. And it's heartbreaking. And I truly continue now my spiritual journey because I have hope and I believe that somehow we will all remember what it is that we truly want. And that is peace and love and community and a healthy family and a warm home. And I hope that other people from hearing this are able to reach out and make a phone call to someone that maybe they were judging from hearing my own personal experience and maybe just hear them out. You know, you don't know people's medical histories and why they were making the decisions they were making. You don't know the reaction they had to previous vaccines or medical procedures, like my own mother, right?
Totally.
And who are we to play God or doctor? We're not. We never were. And I have no idea why we thought we were at this time.
Yeah.
And so my next step now is to continue the protest, but from a place of this, like being the ley line myself and raising the vibration of the earth, continuing to share the stories and listen to people's stories on both sides. I want to hear both sides of the story or all the stories. And pray that we never, ever, ever fall for something like this again.
So tell me, I hope at this point, the people that are listening are so inspired because I think it takes a lot of bravery. And I want to know what you would say to somebody, say something happens like this again. Say they try again. Say we're, like I said earlier in this interview, we are being forced to strengthen a muscle maybe we've never known how to strengthen before. The muscles of our intuition, the muscles of our heart. What would be your, and essentially the muscle of us coming back to the wild within us, to our own wild. What would your recommendation be to these mothers, to women, to anyone who's listening who wants to be brave too?
Discernment is a big one right now. I think that was a big part of the eclipse and this new moon, having better discernment. But obviously that's easier said than done when you're trying to remember, be more in touch with your heart, your womb, your intuition. For me, it was community. It was really like but community with sovereignty. I think that's still really important. You're not looking for a guru. You're not looking for a leader.
Commune.
Right, exactly. Even. Right. Any of that. You're looking to participate and be around people that are not always like-minded either, right?
Yep.
Because I go to lots of hippie things and awake things and freedom things, and I don't have the same opinions of all of the people.
Yeah.
And I don't come from a fear base that a lot of people do. So it's still important to go to these things, participate in sound baths, ecstatic dances, cacao ceremony, breath work, womb healing, literally just being, doing yoga in the grass with community, and just start listening to yourself and listening to that voice in your head that says, what about the women and children? And that voice for you is going to be something different. And what's also so incredible was when I went to Scotland and we were together there, I had this remembering of a past life where my husband died in battle, and I was left as the leader of these women and children.
Amazing.
And that makes complete sense.
It totally does.
As to why in 2022 and minus 22 degrees, that's all I could think about.
Or even your connection to mother and womb.
Yeah.
Your whole life.
Yeah. And maternal health, body autonomy, body sovereignty, and not just being what we put in our bodies, that being physically where our bodies are allowed to be. And I think that's something in and of itself too, to even think about, like, where is your body being forced right now where you don't want it to be forced, physically in a space or physically in a situation. And getting back to your nervous system, I think, is really the most important thing, like really getting more in an even keel as much as possible. I find I love community for that as much as I also do the things that you talked about to help you with suffering from having COVID. And before you know it, you'll become your own medicine, your own biggest advocate. You'll be able to fight your own war with peace and love, and live your whole life like that, not just fighting your government.
Yeah. I mean, and I would be bold enough to say that because of those actions, because of your bravery, because you chose yourself, even amongst not knowing if it was even right. Like you're like, I could be crazy.
Absolutely. A crackpot is
I
what
could
people
literally
believed of
be
me.
crazy, truly. And yet you still said yes. Yeah. And now you're here 2 years later. And I feel like you're more, I mean, I didn't know you, but this is what I'm assuming. You're more yourself than ever before. You're more, not even just brave, but, your nervous system's more settled. You're trusting yourself more. You understand your throat's more open, your womb's more open, your chakras are clear. Like, and it's not just because of this one thing. It like takes work to fight for you and just you, and to fight that. And then also say, I'm going to continue to be in community, and then like to meet people where they're at and be like, I actually don't agree with that. Okay, now what's next? Like, you are now anchoring into your own truth, your own guru, more than ever. Yeah.
So it is.
Would you agree?
Of course I would agree. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I don't think it, like I said, it doesn't take fighting the government, but it can, it's your own battles, right? You know what they are. I think that's really like, I think that's where people don't necessarily, women don't necessarily connect to, is like, you know what this battle is.
I mean, the battle is the front lines of like what your kids eat. And who, like what school they go to, and what you believe in for your kids, and how you act in your home and in the grocery store. Like, sure, that you were able to go and take that time. And what a cool ripple that, even just that as an example, so that we can all have our own ripples of our own shields that we're carrying, and our own words that we're saying, and our own ways that we're fighting for ourselves. And even fighting in the terms of just like fighting for our peace, fighting for our nervous systems.
Yes. You being in peace is the battle.
Is the battle.
Because the TV wants you to have
fear.
This,
even with the eclipse, I'm like, wow. But I mean, our nervous systems are so wrecked, especially from COVID. We're terrified. Are you kidding?
Right.
What they could do, what they did. And we believe that we wanted to protect everybody. That's all we want. And so now I mean, the biggest job we have is to fight for that, our own peace, and trust that.
Absolutely.
Wow. Beautiful.
I love you.
You're incredible.
Ditto.
Thank you so much for sharing your medicine.
Thank you.
And for being here and saying yes to coming here.
Your weird auntie sister.
Heather's staying in Baylor's room. I'm like, you're getting thrown in
under the solar system.
Under his paper mache Mars and Jupiter. And I'm just so grateful to call you a sister, and thank you for your example, and thank you for coming back to the wild within you.
Thank you.
And I hope that you guys can find her on Instagram. Tell us your Instagram.
One Love Heather, the number 1.
Beautiful. That's a really cool handle to have, actually. Thanks. Wow. I'm impressed you have that. Find her there. Follow her. Maybe just DM her and tell her thank you for being brave to share this message, because I know it's controversial. And yet that's what we are in Simply Wild, as we come back to the wild within us and we bravely share our stories. And I hope that you feel inspired to come back to the wild within you, and remember that you are never too much and always enough. See you next time.